now to our second speaker of this second session. She is an AI ethicist working with And Digital and the BBC. For those of you who don't know And Digital, while they are quite large, they were created about 11 years ago and now have offices, clubs as they're called, across the UK, the Netherlands, and as well as on the East Coast of America. Hundreds, maybe 1,000 plus employees. So a big firm operating with some huge brands, Heineken, Nike, British Airways, Tesco, and many others. So as the title of our next speaker would suggest, we're going to return to AI once more. Obviously a topic that's generated a massive amount of press and interest particularly since November 2022. And one of those areas is in the ethics of operating AI, both in terms of taking AI and trying to build it into our products, as well as trying to understand the bigger impacts of how this technology could affect wider society. And so can we welcome our next speaker, Sidrah Hassan, to talk more about this?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So this is my first time being at the W conference, and I have to say the atmosphere and buzz has been so nice. It reminds me why, networking and events like this are so important. It's nice to meet new people. And we've had some brilliant talks. I've taken away, nuggets of wisdom. So hopefully I can add to that. And like Herb said, AI is absolutely the hype right now. I feel like sometimes it's a Rubik's Cube, like how many, combinations can you get? But I am turning a bit on its head and talking about the ethics today and how that applies to us as technologists when we're looking at building AI products and services. So that's why we'll be talking about, can you build algorithmic justice? Now, this is a very meaty question. So what I'm going to do is be taking it back a few steps and really exploring, firstly, what is AI, and giving us that foundational understanding, because I've met different stakeholders from C-suite all the way to junior analysts, and everybody's understanding of artificial intelligence is slightly different. So I'll start off with a little bit of an explanation of what AI is, what algorithms are, and how are they committing injustice, for which we need to build algorithmic justice. Now, a little quick intro to me. So as Herb mentioned, I'm an AI ethicist. My background is AI governance and product, and I currently work as an AI ethics consultant at And Digital. I'm an AI ethics content creator, freelance for BBC Scotland, which is incredibly fun. But what you need to know about me, most importantly, is that I am a dessert fiend. I love desserts. I feel like I justify it by saying that all this sugar helps me fight algorithmic justice. I don't think my dentist agrees, but that's what I'm holding on to. Unfortunately, you're not going to see me scoffing any sugary treats today. I'm fasting. Ramadan Mubarak to anybody else in the audience who's fasting as well. Maybe stay strong till sunset tonight and then have our feast then. That's when I'll refuel. So to start with this foundational basis of AI, I actually want to do a little experiment. It requires a teeny tiny bit of audience participation, so I'm really counting on you guys. This experiment is absolutely inspired by my 2-year-old, who is currently obsessed with nursery rhymes. And these 2 nursery rhymes that I'm going to get you to fill in the blanks for are inspired by his current favorites, the ones that we belt out to the nursery kind of run every morning. Okay, so never did I think I would be singing at a conference, but here we are. So bear with me. This has a point, I promise. So the first one is, row, row, row your... Oh, amazing, everyone is awake. Thank you so much. And then the second one, just for good measure, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. So what you've just helped me demonstrate is essentially what AI is fundamentally supposed to do, which is fill in the blanks. So you feed AI a lot of data, just like when we were younger, our teachers, our carers, they taught us these nursery rhymes. And then in that AI, in the machine learning, the AI starts to understand the patterns and sequences and sift that through. Just like the melody and the tone in the nursery rhymes help us to develop our speech milestones, our cognitive development, and then the magic happens. The GPTs, the Claudes, the Geminis, that whatever you want to use of the world, they give us the answer to what we ask for, which is filling in the blank, what you've all done for me. So thank you very much. To give you a more traditional definition of AI refers to artificial intelligence that can independently process information and execute tasks based on that information similar to humans. So it tries to mimic human thinking, such as logic, reasoning, processing information. And AI has important subfields, and they include machine learning, as I've mentioned, natural language processing, so how we talk to each other on a natural level, computer vision, and robotics. The top three are the more common subfields that we'll come across with the AI products and services that we use out there today. And algorithms. So what are algorithms? Well, algorithms are essentially a set of instructions. It tells machine learning how to sift that data and utilize it in a meaningful way so that whatever human, organization, company is wanting to extract from that data, it can deliver on that outcome. So if I am to continue on the theme of desserts, if we think of AI's output, so the answer that we get from ChatGPT, for example, as the cake, then you can think of the data as the raw ingredients. So the milk, the sugar, the flour, the eggs. And then the algorithm is the recipe that tells you how to put that data or those raw ingredients together in a way to get an outcome, which is the cake. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, Sidrah, if the algorithms are just a set of arbitrary instructions, sounds pretty objective, where's the injustice happening, right? You're saying we need to build algorithmic injustice. Well, where is the injustice? Well, it's with bias. Now, bias is a very natural thing for humans. It's programmed into our psyche. But we have positive bias, it keeps us safe, but we also have negative bias in the world. And unfortunately, some of the social structures in our society are created based on those negative biases, such as racism, sexism, ableism. Now, we know that that is an indicator of our flawed and unequal society, but we strive for better. Now, that's the fundamental difference between humans and AI. While we know that that bias is negative, wrong, we want to get to a better place, AI, the machines, they don't know that. They start to pick up on these anomalies and these patterns and sequences in the data and think that that's how the optimal world is run. And actually, that's the output that is then exacerbated. So as you can see here, this is a really good graph that shows how we have historical bias in our world. That's then fed into our data generation. And as you can see, that sources of bias then end up being filtered into the deployment, back out into the world. And like I say, exacerbating racial bias, gender bias, ableism. And that is not as easy to turn off or correct as it might be with humans. Now, this share of the population who are using the internet, this graph shows that in 2016, a majority of internet users were actually from the global north. So as you can see, 78% of North America, 73% of Europe and Central Asia were using the internet, and only 20% of sub-Saharan Africa. Now, these frontier model companies, but actually a lot of companies using AI, are scraping the web for data. Well, look at that bias. That's a global north bias. And that is then put into these machines that are deployed in the world for a global audience. And you can see how that bias then starts to make its way out into the world and actually infringe on civil liberties of people who are using this. Now, let me take you into some case studies of these biases. So the first one is what I like to call patriarchal GPT. So this is ChatGPT, where it's been asked to give a performance review for 2 different employees. Now, all the context that was fed into this GPT was exact same. The only thing that changed was the names. So as you can see, John and Jane, indicating their gender. And in the overall performance rating, John exceeded expectations, whereas Jane was just meeting expectations. Now, this should give us some pause for thought to understand what biases existed in the data and what lack of risk mitigations that allowed ChatGPT to then pick up on these biases and say, well, actually, males tend to do better or perform exceptionally, whereas females tend to just meet expectations. In another example, this is Amazon's AI hiring tool. Now, this is quite an infamous example, so you might have come across it. But in 2018, it was reported that the hiring tool that Amazon was using was ranking female candidates lower than male candidates. Now, what had happened in this scenario is that the AI algorithm was fed successful applicants, CVs of successful applicants, should I say, from a 10-year period, so from 2004 to 2014. Now, what they didn't realize was that the majority of these CVs were actually of male, so male candidates, indicating a gender imbalance of the tech industry at the time, although we could argue that we still have a long way to go even now. Now, as a result of that, it's learned that male candidates were preferred over female, therefore it started to discount the female CVs. When the team learned what was happening, they anonymized the CVs, but as with machine learning and AI, it gets better, learns over time. It had picked up on other patterns, such as if in the extracurricular it says netball team, that's indicator that this is a CV of a female colleague, discount that. So the team eventually got rid of this hiring tool because they couldn't guarantee that it was being neutral and that the bias was removed. Now, another case study is of Robert Williams. So in 2020, Robert Williams was incarcerated for a crime for stealing $30,000 worth of luxury watches, except he was 50 miles away from the crime scene at the time that it happened. So this was due to racial bias in an AI facial recognition system. Now, AI facial recognition tools have shown to display racial bias time and time again. And in fact, a study done in the US showed that AI facial recognition tools were 10 to 100 times more likely to misidentify black people than white people. Now, what happened here was that the police didn't do any further investigations with this AI facial recognition tool. They fed it hazy CCTV footage of the crime and a lineup of driver's licenses, out of which it predicted that Williams was likely the perpetrator, when he wasn't. Now, in our society, as AI tools become more entrenched in things like social services or job opportunities, there's a real concern that we are relying on these tools too much and we don't have that human in the loop. We're not corroborating and doing the necessary critical analysis, as is in this case, where the police didn't do the necessary analysis that was needed and wrongfully incarcerated Williams. Now, I don't want to leave you with a bleak picture, so let's move on to how we can correct some of these things. How can you build algorithmic justice? Well, as a person comes from a product background, I just love seeing the future state. So any analysts and product people out there are probably giving you a little bit of PTSD from your day job, right? But we love to envision what the future state looks like. So what does it look like when we have built and achieved algorithmic justice? Well, it looks like AI tools and systems that are out there in the world that are inclusive, they're ethical, and they're transparent. They look like AI systems and products that take into account people's context, cultures, different communities, and also their civil liberties. It looks like AI systems that are used in hiring that don't discriminate against race or gender. And they're transparent. So a lot of us will have heard that AI systems are black boxes. That doesn't need to be the future. They can be transparent and produce verifiable content and make those outputs clear. So actually, we can put those risk mitigations in place earlier on. So if the output is unaligned to what we want the outcome to be, we know where to change it and where the course of action needs to go. Now, let me talk about the actual question, come on to answering it. So how do we build algorithmic justice? Well, firstly, it starts with AI governance. And I know we've heard a lot, if you're in the AI safety space, about governance being that needs to be divorced from innovation because it doesn't allow innovation to thrive. I'm here to tell you and remind us all that that is not the truth. Governance and ethical AI systems and innovation, they are actually, ethical AI systems are the love child of governance and innovation, because ultimately we're building products for people. So when their safety and how they are able to use the products is at the forefront, then we can innovate a lot better and a lot more confidently. And AI governance, we'll have different levels of people in the room. It's not always about being at that C-suite level and drafting an AI policy and starting to get steering groups together. AI governance essentially is that risk mitigation that I've been talking about, and how can we bring that thinking into our teams? So it could look as simple as our definition of done or our definition of ready. We think in that definition of done, actually, is our system ethical? Have questions that are probing the team to make sure that they're building this tech responsibly. Then we have thought diversity. Now, in this climate where D&I is heavily under fire, it's really our responsibility, that's the word I'm looking for, to really champion diversity, inclusion, and ethics, because that's what makes successful teams, which eventually make successful products. When we have a team that has thought diversity, we're building for a diverse population. And hiring, retaining, and empowering those diverse teams allows us to make sure that we're thinking of those ethical considerations early on. However, it's not good enough just to have diverse teams if we don't allow them to thrive. So psychological safety, this is all about creating an environment where we allow that thought diversity to actually thrive, because it's a lot better to be challenged by your colleagues than to be hated by your customers. So when we make sure that we're empowering our teams, empowering our colleagues to ask the difficult questions, which might not feel great in the moment, they allow us to think about things and expand our horizon beyond what we maybe have thought. And ethical literacy. So providing training around building AI systems that focus on safety and responsibility means that our teams are equipped with essential knowledge and tools to then bring that into the product discussions, to bring that into the engineering, to bring that into the teams that we are working in, and to the stakeholders that we're talking to and we're responsible for. It all starts with that empowerment piece. That ethical literacy is that foundation. So while that was the last point to come up, it's probably one of the most important and underpinning. And the reason I say this is because essentially what we're wanting to do is build AI systems into weapons of moral construction rather than weapons of mass destruction. Now, I know, I hope I don't sound like a motivational speaker, but we've been living, or we are living, in pretty bleak times, and often it can feel very hopeless. What can I do to help when there's just so much going on in the world? And actually, I'm here to say that we as teams, the little things that we do, they really matter. So looking at building safely and responsibly for a better economical world, but for a better environment as well, it's absolutely possible, and it starts with these little steps. It starts with the conversations in our teams. It starts with questioning. It starts with bringing that, not the user, but the human, the person at the end of our product, back into the room and back into our minds and at the forefront. Actually, if what we're building, does this help them or does this hinder them? And one thing to remember is that often when we're, moving fast and breaking things, it's marginalised communities who have to foot the bill. And a lot of the times, this is just not a privilege that marginalised communities can afford, to just be on the brunt of this every time. And here are some tools. So the four elements that the four takeaways that I put together, these are some tools that can help you really incorporate that into your teams. So the AI Ethics Hub is actually a website that I created, which has very much resonated with me when the other talks were happening. I built this on Lovable really quickly. I'm not a coder or engineer by any stretch of the imagination. So I quickly put this together on Lovable. I do have a domain now, but it's all about really, I had this idea, what questions should we be asking in our product teams? What should designers be asking? What should engineers be asking? What should product managers be asking in that whole product life cycle? So you can go on that website and have a look. And if you have any questions, just grab me at the end. We've got different risk management frameworks that I definitely encourage you to explore. You've got data ethics canvases. The AI ethics course, this website has fantastic lectures on it, which you can go and explore this topic even further. And then some courses, the Blue Dot Fundamental course I actually did and finished just in February, fantastic course. So this helps with that literacy and upskilling. Thank you very much.
Thank you so million for a really great talk about, was obviously super interesting, and what sounds very complicated problem with massive implications as we move forward. The suggestions that you talked about in terms of inserting diversity into the management that oversees perhaps some of the outputs of the day, I mean that's obviously one step forward. There was some question about, is there anything that can be done about the actual underlying data, which obviously has the bias baked into it in the first place? I mean, I don't know. I have to imagine there have been discussions about how we improve the data that gets fed into these AI systems.
Absolutely. So while I'm not a data scientist, 100%, I think the data quality is incredibly important, and that's something that we should be looking at when we're looking at what data we pull for our AI systems. And that starts off with some practical things like data cards. So where you've got data cards and on it is illustrated what is included in that data, what is missing from that data, just so you know what maybe other considerations you need to put in. So actually, is this data just based on one demographic or on one race? How can we pull in data that kind of balances that and then feed it into our systems? So yeah, data quality, 100%.
Okay. And I mean, I know there have been various panels and advisory boards and such things that have been put together. And we live in a world where the actual legal boards of these companies seem to have very little influence about how they're actually run. I don't get a sense that the Tesla board seems to have a lot of influence over its supposed CEO, as one example. So, I mean, is there a sense that it's that there are, so for example, one of the questions here was about, if you were advising OpenAI, what might you be telling them to do differently or consider more strongly or whatever? They're obviously right at the center of it all.
Yeah, I feel like the people who already tried to do that, who are in much better positions than me, have left and set up their own companies. So I don't know if there's much more that I could add, but really it starts with, so these frontier model companies are really data hungry, and then we move on to synthetic data as well to kind of keep up with that consumption. But really, again, it's at the fundamental level. What does your data quality look like? Where is there bias, and how can we mitigate that if we talk about the more practical steps? And are we making sure that we're including different demographics, different cultures, different contexts? Where is this product going to go live? For example, ChatGPT is live globally, but actually there's a person whose name that I've completely forgotten, which is really frustrating, but he created BlackGPT because ChatGPT was just not taking into account any of the nuances or the cultural impacts and differences of those who lived in the African continent compared to Europe and the Eurocentrism of it. So yeah, it would very much be about where are the biases, how can we mitigate that, what does our data quality look like?
And sorry, I haven't heard of BlackGPT. What? I mean, I can guess what it's all about, but how does it differ?
Literally, it's the exact same as AntGPT. It just has the historical and cultural context of those who come from the African continent.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So these tweak the algorithm to kind of emphasize those aspects of history.
Well, it's even the data, right? So like I mentioned in that graph, although it's from 2016, so those percentages will look different. But when you're scraping the data, the internet for your data, and there's a massive discrepancy between who is providing that data, then you need to look at other data sources and how you collect them to start to mitigate some of those imbalances.
Okay. Now, another one of the questions here, and inevitably, questions about the impact of this on the future of politics, or even the present of politics, come in with regard to, so the question of social media manipulation significantly has affected democratic elections and other behaviors, and AI obviously has the potential to enhance this. Is that must be a large area of discussion with regard to the future of democracy, really? And are there mitigations that that have been suggested with regard to how do we protect our already increasingly fragile institutions?
100%. So it's a massive area of discussion, and I think nobody has the answer to that. In fact, I think a few months ago I really felt that there's this trajectory of, depending on what AI chatbot you choose, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT, you kind of get a different version of answers. So it's almost like newspapers, where you go to these newspapers for a left-wing view, go to these newspapers for a right-wing view, and I'm worried it's kind of descending into that. I don't have an answer, but I do feel like this is why AI safety, AI ethics in this conversation and discussion is more necessary and relevant, because we need to come to some sort of conclusion as to what happens in that instance, and we're kind of seeing that unravel as a result of Trump's administration as well. So I think it's an ongoing thing with no answer.
Scary. Okay. Sorry. So one of the questions. Sorry. Did you were you here for the first session to see Matt Garbus?
I was. Yeah.
So a number of questions here were. Ultimately, what were your thoughts with regard to the audience GPT talk, and again, ultimately your questions about data integrity and bias with regard to his product?
Absolutely. So I think what's really important is that I absolutely understand products like that are so useful in a scenario where it's really difficult to get user testing and really difficult to get users in the room. So it solves a real problem. But I think what's really important there is that human in the loop, the validating it with actual humans, the testing it with actual humans. Because while I agree that there was 90+% accuracy with that, on a slight tangent, I do feel like with the kind of social media that we use, the AI, the technology, sometimes almost our personality is being fed back to us. So, I didn't know what a UGC creator was 5 years ago, which is a user-generated content, but now I know, and I would prefer that style of marketing, because that's what Instagram has kind of conditioned me into, should I say. So now I'm like, oh, that person has that bag, that looks really cool, I'll probably want that. I fall victim to it as well. So I think there's maybe like a larger conversation that needs to happen, but in terms of more practical steps with those kind of products, it would be real humans, getting them into the room and validating it with them. So not completely moving away from user research principles and ethics, but including that into the kind of modernization.
Okay. Final question is with regard to discussion with Matt after his talk with regard to, and inevitably people will be talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, and any thoughts as to how close we might be, given, obviously it's a huge question, and we all have opinions, but just wondering where you stand on it.
I think, I don't know if I'll directly answer this question, but I think that AGI does pose significant consequences for humanity. But I think in the discussion of AGI and the amount of policy and researchers and just money, time and effort that Frontier Model Labs and others invest into this, we miss the actual harms that are being caused right now. So the harms where people are wrongly incarcerated, or the harms which I didn't want to mention because it's not very nice, but where it's led to a teenager committing suicide. Those are actual physical harms. So while I don't know how close we are to AGI or not, I do feel like sometimes it distracts us from the actual harms that are being caused now and trying to bridge that gap, because it's product teams that create those products without realizing how far-reaching the consequences can actually be. And I think those conversations probably need to come before AGI.
And is there? I know you mentioned a few in your presentation, but is there a worst thing that you've read about or you've researched in terms of this bias sort of being borne out?
Well, I think it's the teenager who commits suicide. Because I think that's probably that's where we hit rock bottom, because you know, there's harms that can be highlighted and hopefully corrected, and we can learn from that, but then a family has lost their child. And that is just, yeah, just despicable on another level. And I think that that's probably the worst that I've come across, which fuels my passion even more for talking about these kind of things.
Sidrah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.